I started my job at Ashikawa Archives on a cold October night. The municipal building in Hakodate looked normal enough from the outside, but as Mr. Satu led me down 3 flights of stairs, the temperature dropped with each step. By the time we reached the bottom, my breath made little clouds in front of my face. The archives require specific atmospheric conditions, Mr. Satu explained, not bothering to look back at me as he punched a code into a keypad. The heavy metal door swung open with a hiss. Temperature and humidity control is essential for preservation. The smell hit me first. Old paper, dust, and something else I couldn't name. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed and flickered, casting uneven shadows across rows of metal shelving that stretched farther than I could see. "This way, Miss Wilson." Mr. Satu's voice echoed slightly in the cavernous space. His posture remained perfectly straight as he walked, like he had a ruler taped to his spine. I followed him through a maze of shelves until we reached a small office area with 2 desks facing each other. A figure sat at one of them, head bent over a stack of folders. "You remember Ren, I believe," Mr. Satu said. The person looked up, and I felt a jolt of recognition. We'd gone to the same high school, though we'd never been close. Just someone I'd see in the hallways or cafeteria, but this wasn't the same Ren I remembered. He was taller now, his face leaner, and there was something behind his eyes, a shadow that hadn't been there before. "Emily," he said with a small nod. "You two will work the night shift together," Mr. Satu continued, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. 10 p.m. until 4 a.m., 5 nights a week. He handed us each a thin packet labeled orientation materials and proceeded to go through a list of rules that grew increasingly bizarre as he went on. Rule 1. All files must be returned to their exact location by 3:58 a.m. Rule 2. If you hear footsteps outside the door after 1 a.m., turn off all lights and remain silent for exactly 7 minutes. I glanced at Ren, expecting to see some reaction to these strange instructions, but his face remained impassive. He'd clearly heard all this before. Rule 6. Never leave the archives alone between midnight and 4 a.m., Mr. Satu continued. Rule 7. If you see anyone other than your colleague or myself in the archives, do not acknowledge them. Do not speak to them. Do not look directly at them. By the time he finished, my head was spinning. What kind of archive needed rules like these? "Questions?" Mr. Satu asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't actually interested in hearing any. I had dozens, but something about the cold efficiency of this place made me hold my tongue. "No, sir." "Good. I'll leave you to your work then." He turned and walked away, his footsteps fading until the only sound was the persistent buzz of the fluorescent lights. I sat down at the empty desk across from Ren. "So, we went to Hakodate High together, right? Class of 2016, he finished for me. "You were in Miss Tanaka's advanced English class." I was surprised he remembered that detail. "Yeah, I was." Ren pushed a stack of folders toward me. "These need to be cataloged according to the system in your packet. Section 3. And just like that, we fell into work. The night passed in near silence, broken only by the shuffle of papers and the clicking of keyboard keys. Over the next few days, we established a routine. I'd arrive at 9:55 p.m., and Ren would already be there, sorting through the day's accumulated files. We'd work methodically until 1:44 a.m., when we'd switch desks as required by Rule 4. I never asked why, and Ren never offered an explanation. On our 4th night, something changed. The clock had just ticked past 1 a.m. when I heard it, hollow footsteps in the corridor outside our door. They moved slowly, deliberately, stopping just outside. My hands froze over the keyboard. I looked up at Ren, my heart suddenly pounding. Without a word, he stood and switched off the lights. In the sudden darkness, I felt him move around the desks until he was beside me. His hand found mine, warm and steady, and he squeezed once, a silent instruction to stay still. We sat like that for exactly 7 minutes. I counted every second in my head, trying to control my breathing. The footsteps eventually moved away, fading down the corridor. When Ren finally released my hand and turned the lights back on, I expected him to say something about what had just happened. Instead, he simply returned to his desk and continued working as if nothing unusual had occurred. "Are you going to tell me what that was?" I finally asked. "Rule 2, he replied without looking up. "If you hear footsteps outside the door after 1 a.m., turn off all lights and remain silent for exactly 7 minutes. Yes, I know the rule, but why? What's out there? Ren's eyes met mine briefly. It's better not to ask questions here, Emily. I wanted to push further, but something in his expression stopped me. That shadow behind his eyes seemed darker somehow. Later that night, as we were filing documents from the 1990s, I remembered something. Your sister worked here too, didn't she? May? Ren's hands stilled for just a moment before continuing their methodical sorting. Yes. I'm sorry about what happened to her. The accident, I mean. He didn't respond, and I immediately regretted bringing it up. I'd only heard vague details, something about a car crash 3 years ago. The next night, our 5th, I noticed him as soon as I sat down at my desk. A man in a gray suit standing perfectly still on the other side of the observation window that looked into our office. His face was turned toward me, and I felt a cold shock run through my body. He looked exactly like my father. James Wilson had died when I was 14, but this man had his exact features. The same nose, the same eyes, even the way he held his head slightly tilted to one side. I opened my mouth to say something, but before I could, Ren's voice came low and urgent across the desks. Don't look at him. Don't acknowledge him in any way. I forced my eyes back to my computer screen, my hands shaking. But he looks like… I know. Ren cut me off. Rule 7, Emily. If you see anyone other than your colleague or myself in the archives, do not acknowledge them. I kept my head down, but I could feel the man's gaze on me. After what seemed like hours, but was probably only minutes, I risked a glance at the window. He was gone. Who was that? I whispered. Focus on your work, Ren said, but his voice was gentler now. We'll talk later. At exactly 1:44 a.m., we switched desks as required. I sat in Ren's chair, still warm from his body, and continued the cataloging work he'd been doing. That's when I noticed them, strange notations in the margins of some files, names, dates, and symbols that didn't match any cataloging system I'd been taught. I flipped through more folders. The notations appeared sporadically, always in the same neat handwriting that I recognized as Ren's. Some seemed to be coordinates, others looked like timestamps, and a few were just single words: shift, boundary, collector. In one file from 1987, I found something that made my blood run cold. Written in the margin next to a birth certificate was my own name, Emily Wilson, followed by tomorrow's date. I looked up at Ren, who was focused on his work at my desk. What did he know about this place? And more importantly, what did he know about me? I arrived for my 6th night at Ashikawa Archives with a knot in my stomach. The municipal building looked ordinary from the outside, its concrete facade blending with the other government structures in downtown Hakodate. But I knew better now. Whatever was happening 3 floors below ground level was anything but ordinary. The elevator hummed as it carried me down. I punched in the access code Mr. Satu had given me, trying to ignore how my fingers trembled slightly. The heavy metal door swung open with that familiar hiss, releasing the smell of old paper and dust into the corridor. Ren was already at his desk when I walked in, his head bent over a stack of yellowing folders. He didn't look up as I set my bag down and took my seat across from him. Hey, I said. He nodded without meeting my eyes, his movements stiff and precise as he sorted through the documents. There was something mechanical about the way he worked tonight, like he was operating on autopilot. His usual quiet focus had hardened into something more rigid. Everything okay? I asked, logging into my computer. Fine, he replied, his voice flat. There's a backlog from the 1980s section that needs processing. I've left it on your desk. I glanced at the stack of folders he'd indicated. They looked like standard archive material, birth certificates, death records, property deeds, the usual bureaucratic paper trail of human existence. We worked in silence for the next 2 hours. I kept stealing glances at Ren, trying to read his expression, but his face remained impassive. The only sound was the shuffle of papers and the clicking of keyboard keys. At midnight, the temperature in the room plummeted. It happened suddenly. 1 minute I was comfortable, the next I was shivering. My breath clouded in front of my face as I pulled my sweater tighter around me. Does it always get this cold at midnight? I asked, rubbing my hands together. Ren looked up briefly. The building adjusts its atmospheric conditions on a schedule. Something about his tone made me think there was more to it than that, but I didn't press. Instead, I turned back to my work, pulling another file from the 1980s stack. My hand froze when I saw the tab. Wilson, Emily, J. My name. My full name, including the middle initial that I rarely used. I stared at it, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. This was from the 1980s, years before I was born. How could my name be here? I glanced at Ren, but he was focused on his own work, seemingly unaware of my discovery. I remembered Rule 5 from our orientation. All files marked with blue tabs must be placed in the blue bin without being opened. The tab on my file was blue. My fingers hovered over the cover. What was inside? Records of my life? Predictions of my future? The temptation to open it was overwhelming, but something stopped me. The memory of the man in the gray suit with my father's face, and the way Ren had warned me not to acknowledge him. There were rules here for a reason. With reluctance, I placed the file in the blue bin beside my desk, but my fingers lingered on the cover for a moment longer than necessary. When I looked up again, Ren was gone. His chair was still spinning slowly, as if he'd just stood up. His computer screen showed an active session, and his half-empty coffee mug sat beside the keyboard. But there was no sign of him in the office. "Ren?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the large space. No answer. I stood up and walked to the door, peering out into the main archive area. Rows of metal shelving stretched into the distance, but I couldn't see any movement among them. "Ren?" I called again, louder this time. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed in response, one of them flickering erratically. I checked my watch, 12:47 a.m. We weren't supposed to switch desks until 1:44. I was about to step out into the main archive when my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text message from an unknown number. "Wait in the stairwell, don't leave the building." I stared at the screen. The message had to be from Ren, but how had he gotten my number? And why the stairwell? Another buzz. "Now, please." Something in that please made me move. I grabbed my jacket from the back of my chair and headed for the exit, careful to lock the office door behind me as per protocol. The main archive floor felt vast and empty as I hurried through it, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the high ceiling. The stairwell was cold and dimly lit, concrete steps leading both up to the main building and down to somewhere I hadn't been yet. I sat on the steps, hugging my knees to my chest, and waited. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. I checked my watch repeatedly, watching as 1 a.m. became 2, then 3. I tried texting the unknown number, but my messages showed as undelivered. The cold seeped through my clothes and into my bones, but I stayed put, remembering Ren's urgent pleas. At 3:30 a.m., the stairwell door opened. Ren stood there, his skin pale and his eyes unfocused. He looked like someone who had seen something they couldn't quite process. "You didn't open it," he said. Not a question, but a statement. "The file with my name? No." I stood up, my legs stiff from sitting so long. "Where have you been?" I was worried. "There are other rooms down here," he replied, his voice distant. He led me back to our office, his movements less mechanical now, but somehow more unsettled. Once inside, he locked the door behind us and checked the observation window twice, as if expecting to see someone watching. I noticed his notepad on the desk, open to a page I hadn't seen before. It showed what looked like a crude map, lines and boxes representing tunnels and rooms extending far beyond the archives we worked in. Some areas were marked with symbols I didn't recognize, and others had dates written beside them. "What is this?" I asked, pointing to the notepad. Ren hesitated, then sat down heavily in his chair. "Sit," he said, gesturing to my seat across from him. I did as he asked, waiting as he seemed to gather his thoughts. "My sister worked here before me," he finally said. "May, you mentioned her the other night." I nodded. "You said she had an accident." "That's what they told everyone." His eyes met mine, and I saw that shadow behind them grow darker. "But it wasn't an accident. She disappeared." "Disappeared? How?" Ren glanced at the observation window before continuing. "May was always curious, too curious for this place. She started noticing things about the files, patterns, connections that didn't make sense in normal reality." "Like my name in a file from the 1980s, I said quietly. He nodded. "Exactly like that. She believed she'd discovered something about this building, about how it works. How it works. It's an archive. It's more than that." Ren leaned forward, lowering his voice. "The building shifts after 4 a.m. The layout changes. Doors appear where there were none before, leading to places that shouldn't exist." I thought about the strange rules we'd been given, especially Rule 6, never leave the archives alone between midnight and 4 a.m. May found a way to use the shift, Ren continued. She left notes, clues in the margins of files. I've been following them since I started working here. And tonight, where did you go? I found a new passage, one of the ones on my map. He tapped the notepad. It only exists between 12:30 and 3:45 a.m. I tried to process what he was telling me. It sounded impossible. Yet after what I'd seen in the past 5 nights, the man with my father's face, the strange rules, my name in a decades-old file, I couldn't dismiss it entirely. You think May is still in the building somewhere, after 3 years? Not in the building as most people understand it. Ren's eyes had that unfocused look again. Time works differently in some of the passages. I've found her things. A hair tie, a notebook page, a candy wrapper, left recently. And the man in the gray suit? The one who looks like my father? Is he connected to this? Ren's expression darkened. Yes, he's the reason she ran. The reason she had to disappear into the building itself. Who is he? Not who. What? Ren checked his watch. It's almost 4 a.m. We need to finish our work and get out of here before the shift. I wanted to ask more questions, but something in his expression stopped me. Instead, I turned back to my computer and finished cataloging the remaining files, my mind racing with everything Ren had told me. At 3:58 a.m., we shut down our computers and gathered our things, just as we had every night before. But as we walked toward the exit, I couldn't shake the feeling that the archives around us were more than they appeared, that behind the rows of shelves and stacks of paper lay doorways to places I couldn't begin to imagine. And somewhere in those impossible spaces, May was still alive, still running from the man in the gray suit. The man who, for reasons I couldn't understand, wore my father's face. I'd spent the last 4 nights thinking about what Ren had told me in the stairwell. About May. About the building shifting. About the man in the gray suit who wasn't a man at all. Each night since then, we'd fallen back into our routine, cataloging files, switching desks at 1:44 a.m., leaving promptly at 3:58. But something had changed between us. The silence felt different now, charged with unspoken questions and half-revealed truths. Tonight marked our 10th night working together at Ashikawa Archives. I arrived at 9:55 p.m. as usual, finding Ren already at his desk. He looked up when I entered, his eyes meeting mine briefly before returning to his work. There's a new batch from the 1990s, he said, nodding toward a stack of folders on my desk. I hung my jacket on the back of my chair and sat down. Any blue tabs? 3. His voice was carefully neutral, already separated them for the bin. I glanced at the blue bin beside my desk. It contained several files now, including the one with my name that I'd found 4 nights ago. I'd been thinking about that file constantly, wondering what it contained. Why was my name on a document from before I was born? What connection did I have to this place? We worked in silence for the next few hours. At midnight, the temperature dropped as it always did. I pulled on my sweater without comment, having learned to expect it. At 1 a.m., we heard footsteps in the corridor and followed Rule 2, lights off, complete silence for 7 minutes. By now, this strange ritual felt almost normal. At 2:10 a.m., Ren stood up from his desk. Bathroom break, he said. Back in 5. I nodded, continuing to type catalog entries into the database. The door closed behind him with a soft click. I waited 30 seconds, counting each one in my head, before looking up at the closed door. Then I turned to the blue bin. My file was still there, 3rd from the top. The blue tab with Wilson Emily J. clearly visible. Rule 5 echoed in my mind. All files marked with blue tabs must be placed in the blue bin without being opened. But Ren had broken the rules. He'd gone exploring in the building during the shift. He'd been searching for his sister for 3 years. I reached for the file, my heart pounding in my chest. The folder felt heavier than it should have, warm to the touch like something alive. I opened it. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them, arranged chronologically. Me as a baby in my mother's arms. My 5th birthday party with the butterfly cake I remembered so clearly. My father teaching me to ride a bike, his face exactly like the man in the gray suit. I flipped through them faster. My high school graduation, my college dorm room, my first apartment in Hakodate. All moments I recognized from my life. Then came photos I didn't recognize. Me sitting at this very desk in the archives, wearing clothes I didn't own yet. Me standing in a stairwell I'd never seen before. Me and Ren running down a corridor, our faces twisted with fear. The last photo showed us standing in an unfamiliar corridor with strange lighting. Ren was holding my hand and we were facing a door that seemed to glow around the edges. I turned the photo over. Written on the back in neat handwriting were the words, "Final shift, 3:58 a.m." I heard the office door open and quickly closed the file, but not fast enough. Ren stood in the doorway, his eyes fixed on the blue folder in my hands. His expression told me everything. He knew exactly what I'd done. "You opened it," he said quietly, closing the door behind him. I didn't deny it. "There are photos of things that haven't happened yet, of us." Ren walked over and sat down heavily in his chair. He looked tired suddenly, the shadows under his eyes more pronounced. "The files aren't records," he said after a long moment. "They're anchors. They keep us tethered to this reality." "What does that mean?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice even though we were alone. "Think about it, Emily. Why would an archive need rules about not acknowledging strangers? About turning off lights when you hear footsteps? About never leaving alone between certain hours?" I shook my head. "I don't know. Because this isn't just an archive. The files here, they're connections to people's timelines. They're predetermined paths." He gestured to the folder in my hands. "That's not just information about you. It's what keeps you bound to your assigned reality." I looked down at the file, feeling its weight differently now. And the blue tabs? Files that are particularly important. Anchors for people who might otherwise drift. "Like your sister," I said, understanding dawning. "That's why you're here. You're looking for her file." Ren nodded. "I've been searching for May for 3 years, taking jobs at different archive locations across Japan, following her trail." "Different locations? There are more places like this?" "7 that I know of. Hakodate, Tokyo, Kyoto, Sapporo, Nagasaki, Osaka, and Fukuoka. All connected somehow, all part of the same system." He ran a hand through his hair. "May worked at the Tokyo branch first. That's where she started noticing patterns, making connections. She transferred to Hakodate just before she disappeared." "And you think she found a way to use the building's shift to escape?" "I know she did." His eyes met mine, intense and certain. "She left me clues. Messages hidden in the margins of files, coordinates that only make sense during the shift. She was being hunted by something." "The man in the gray suit," I said. Ren nodded. "The collector," May called him in her notes. "He ensures no one escapes their predetermined path. When someone tries to break free, to change their timeline, he comes for them." "But why does he look like my father?" "He takes different forms, usually someone you trust or someone who's gone. Makes it harder to run from him." Ren glanced at his watch. "We should get back to work. We've already broken enough rules tonight." I reluctantly placed my file back in the blue bin, but my mind was racing with questions. If what Ren said was true, then everything I thought I knew about reality, about free will, was wrong. We were all just following predetermined paths, our lives mapped out in files stored in underground archives. We worked in silence for the next hour, but I couldn't focus. The images from my file kept flashing through my mind, especially that last photo of us standing before a glowing door. "Final shift, 3:58 a.m. What did it mean? At exactly 3:30 a.m., the temperature in the room plummeted further. My breath came out in thick white clouds, and the fluorescent lights overhead began to flicker erratically. "Ren," I said, my voice tight with sudden fear. He was already on his feet, staring at the observation window. I followed his gaze and felt my blood turn to ice. The man in the gray suit stood there, perfectly still, his face an exact replica of my father's. But this time, something was different. He raised both hands and pressed them against the glass. Where his palms touched, the window began to frost over, tiny cracks spreading outward like spider webs. "He's never done that before," Ren whispered, backing away from the window. "He's never tried to come in." The cracks in the glass grew larger, spreading across the entire window. The man's face began to change, features shifting and melting like wax, my father's face giving way to other faces I didn't recognize. Ren grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the far wall of the office. "We have to go now," he insisted, pressing his palm against what looked like solid concrete. To my shock, the wall seemed to ripple under his touch, revealing the outline of a door that hadn't existed before. "The building's shifting early," he said, his voice urgent. "This is our chance." I hesitated, remembering Rule 6. Never leave the archives alone between midnight and 4 a.m. It had been drilled into us from the first night. Behind us, the observation window shattered with a sound like breaking ice. The man in the gray suit, or whatever he really was, stepped through the opening, glass crunching under his perfectly polished shoes. His face continued to shift, cycling through different features, but his eyes remained fixed on us. "Emily," he said, his voice a perfect imitation of my father's, "you need to stay. This isn't your path." In that moment, I realized Ren had been right all along. The rules weren't for our protection. They were containment protocols. They were meant to keep us here, tethered to our files, following our predetermined paths. The door in the wall solidified under Ren's touch, a handle materializing where there had been none before. He looked at me, his eyes asking a question he didn't need to voice. I nodded, and together we pulled the door open, revealing a corridor bathed in strange, shifting light. I followed Ren through the corridors of the municipal building, my backpack heavy with supplies we'd gathered over the past 2 days. We'd arrived at 9:45 p.m., 15 minutes before our shift officially started, 15 minutes before Mr. Satu would check the security cameras. My heart pounded against my ribs as we took the elevator down to the archives. "You ready?" Ren asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, though ready wasn't exactly how I felt. Terrified, maybe, or exhilarated. We'd escaped that night, but only just, ducking back into the main archive area seconds before 4 a.m. when the building stopped shifting. The man in the gray suit had vanished, but we knew he'd be back. The elevator doors opened with a soft ping, and we stepped out into the familiar hallway. The smell of old paper and dust greeted us, but it no longer felt comforting. It felt like a trap. "We have 13 minutes, Ren said, checking his watch as we punched in the access code and entered the archives. Our office looked normal, 2 desks, 2 computers, the blue bin for special files. But I knew better now. I knew what this place really was. "I'll get my file," I said, heading straight for the blue bin, while Ren went to his desk. The folder with my name on it felt warm to the touch, just like before. I slipped it into my backpack without opening it. Meanwhile, Ren gathered his notes and the maps he'd been creating for the past 3 years, carefully folding them and tucking them into his jacket pocket. 9 minutes, he said, glancing at the clock on the wall. We moved quickly through the main archive area, past rows of metal shelving stacked with ordinary-looking files. But they weren't ordinary at all. Each one was an anchor, tethering someone to their predetermined reality. At 9:58 p.m., we reached the restricted section where the pre-1972 files were kept. A keypad secured the metal gate, but Ren punched in a code without hesitation. "How did you know that?" I asked as the gate swung open. May left it in her notes. She found all the access codes before she disappeared. We slipped inside, closing the gate behind us. The air felt different here, thicker, almost liquid. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly blue glow. "What exactly are we looking for?" I asked, keeping my voice low even though we were alone. Ren ran his fingers along the shelves, reading the labels. "A file from 1968. It contains coordinates for a maintenance corridor that only exists during the shift. And you think that's where May went?" He nodded, his expression determined. "I've found traces of her in other corridors, but this is where her trail leads." As we searched, I couldn't help but think about everything Ren had told me over the past 2 days. How the archives weren't just storage facilities, they were boundaries between realities. How the files weren't just records, they were connections to people's timelines, keeping them bound to predetermined paths. "I still don't understand," I said, watching as Ren pulled out file after file, checking their contents before putting them back. "If these files control our realities, who created them? Who's in charge?" Ren paused, looking up at me. "I don't know. May had theories, government experiments, reality architects, entities from other dimensions, but she never found a definitive answer." "And the man in the gray suit? The collector? He ensures no one escapes their predetermined path. When someone tries to break free, to change their timeline, he comes for them." Ren's voice hardened. "He came for May when she discovered the truth. Now he's coming for us." I thought about the man's face, my father's face, and felt a chill run down my spine. "Why me? Why does he look like my father when he comes for me?" "I don't know. Maybe because your father's death was a pivotal moment in your timeline. Or maybe because he knows that face will make you hesitate, Ren pulled out another file, his eyes scanning the contents. Found it. The file contained a single sheet of paper with a series of numbers and symbols that meant nothing to me, but Ren studied them intently, his lips moving silently as he committed them to memory. These are the coordinates, he explained, but they only work during the shift between midnight and 4 a.m. So what do we do until then? We wait, and we stay hidden. He checked his watch again. Mr. Satu will notice we're not at our desks soon. We need to move deeper into the restricted section. We made our way through the maze of shelves, going further than I'd ever been before. The air grew colder, the lighting dimmer. Eventually, we reached a small alcove hidden between two tall filing cabinets. It was just big enough for both of us to sit with our backs against the wall, our knees almost touching. Ren pulled out a thermos of coffee from his backpack and offered me some. I took a sip, grateful for the warmth. How long have you been planning this? I asked. Since I started working here. 3 years of gathering information, mapping the building during shifts, following May's clues. He took the thermos back, his fingers brushing against mine. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed someone else who could see the truth. Is that why you didn't stop me from opening my file? You wanted me to see what was inside? He nodded slowly. I saw something in you from the first night. The way you questioned the rules, the way you noticed details. You reminded me of May. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. At midnight, the temperature dropped dramatically, just as it always did. But now I understood why. It was the first sign of the shift beginning. It's starting, Ren whispered, checking his watch. We should move. We gathered our things and made our way back through the restricted section, following a path only Ren seemed to know. The layout of the archives felt different now, corridors stretching longer than they should, rooms appearing where none had been before. At 1:44 a.m., the time when we would normally switch desks, Ren stopped in front of what looked like a blank wall. He pulled out his notes and checked the coordinates again. This is it, he said, pressing his palm against the wall. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, the wall began to ripple like water, revealing the outline of a door. Ren pushed and it swung open, revealing a narrow maintenance corridor bathed in dim red light. Come on, he said, stepping through. I followed, my heart racing. The corridor was cold and damp, with pipes running along the ceiling and walls. Our footsteps echoed on the metal grating beneath our feet. The air smelled of rust and something else, something organic and strange. May came this way, Ren said, his voice tight with emotion. I can feel it. We walked for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. The corridor twisted and turned, sometimes narrowing so much that we had to squeeze through sideways. Finally, it opened into a small circular room with several doors leading off in different directions. In the center of the room lay a backpack, worn and dirty, but unmistakably recent. Beside it was a journal, its pages open to a hand-drawn map. Ren rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside the items. These are May's, he said, his voice breaking. She was here. I knelt beside him, looking at the journal. The map showed corridors and rooms I'd never seen, with notes scribbled in the margins. One door was circled repeatedly with the words "exit point" written beside it. Which door is it? I asked, looking around the room. Ren studied the map, then pointed to a door on our right. Unlike the others, this one had no handle, just a smooth metal surface with strange symbols etched into it. How do we open it? Like this, Ren said, pressing his palm against the center of the door. The metal began to warm under his touch, then dissolve like mist, revealing a corridor beyond. I gasped. The corridor was identical to the one in the last photo from my file, the one labeled Final Shift, 3:58 a.m. It was bathed in shifting light, the walls seeming to pulse with energy. This is it, I whispered. This is where we were going in the photo. Ren nodded, picking up May's journal and stuffing it into his backpack. She found a way out, a way to break free from the predetermined paths. Suddenly, the building began to rumble. The floor beneath us vibrated and dust fell from the ceiling. The shift was becoming unstable. What's happening? I asked, grabbing onto Ren's arm to steady myself. The building knows we're trying to leave. It's fighting back. A cold wind swept through the room, and with it came a familiar presence. I turned to see the man in the gray suit standing in the doorway we'd come through. His face was shifting rapidly now, cycling through dozens of features, but his eyes remained fixed on us. You can't leave, he said, his voice a chorus of different tones. This isn't your path. Ren grabbed my hand, pulling me toward the doorway with no handle. He can't follow where we're going, he said urgently. The files only have power if we believe in them. I understood then what I needed to do. I pulled my file from my backpack and held it up, looking directly at the man in the gray suit. This isn't my path, I said firmly. I choose my own. Then I tore the file in half, watching as the photos inside scattered to the floor. The man in the gray suit let out a sound that was more vibration than scream, his form flickering like a bad television signal. The building's rumbling intensified. Cracks appeared in the walls and ceiling, spreading rapidly. The archives were collapsing. Now! Ren shouted, pulling me through the doorway. We stepped into the corridor of shifting light, still holding hands. Behind us, the maintenance room collapsed in on itself, taking the man in the gray suit with it. But ahead stretched something I couldn't quite comprehend, a space that seemed to contain infinite possibilities, infinite realities. Where are we going? I asked, my voice barely audible over the sound of the collapsing archives. Ren looked at me, a smile breaking across his face for the first time since I'd met him. Wherever we want. We're writing our own stories now.